So, this episode is about a guy named Bill who lives in the woods, is potentially gay, and is a survivalist. Where have I heard that before? Intro, no one cares. Okay, so let's get started. The first several minutes are just more Joel and Ellie. That's what we all love to see as fans of The Last of Us. Just Joel and Ellie trying to bond, trying not to kill one another, and trying not to annoy one another. It's just Joel and Ellieisms. That's what I'm gonna call it from now on. Joel and Ellieisms, because if you know anything about how they interact in the game, you know they're for a good part of the game they hate each other. They're just they just can't stand each other. Pedro Pascal just being Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey being Bella Ramsey. They're growing on me. All right, they're growing on me. There's still a lot of work to be done for me to buy them completely as Joel and Ellie. But this is where the very big gripe comes in because Joel and Ellie are not the stars of this episode. And when you have a show titled The Last of Us and your star players are not in the episode that much, you have a very, very big problem. And that's what I like to call, ladies and gentlemen, that's what I like to call filler. Now, it's here that Joel insists instead of going straight ahead to where they need to go, they should take a longer way. And we find out that it's because if you keep going down this straight path, you will run into a mass graveyard. And Joel was trying to keep Ellie from seeing this mass graveyard. And that little bit right there, just you could tell that there's like a sense of responsibility that Joel is attributing to Ellie. You can sense that there is a paternal bond beginning to form on the side of Joel, not wanting her to see this mass graveyard. And he explains that when the government started evacuating people to quarantine zones during the beginning of the outbreak, they were evacuated, but then if it turns out that there was no room in these quarantine zones, they'd be dug into mass graves and then shot, like execution style, like kind of like the Nazis, you know. Not it's kind of like the same sense. They were evacuated, and if there was no room for you, you'd get executed, and you're laid witness to the carnage that ensues. So this is a good use of transition. We focus in on a green dress, and then the next shot is of this woman holding her baby. September 30th, 2003, so 20 years ago. That thing has been there for 20 years. 20 years. And unfortunately, using context clues, this woman wound up getting executed along with anyone else that didn't fit and that was surplus to requirements in the quarantine zone. Now, here is where we are introduced to Bill, played by Nick Offerman. Now, if you guys remember Bill from the game, he was this big, fat, pretty unlikable guy who uh, helps Joel and Ellie along the first phase of the game. And he's basically this survivalist because he pretty much fortified the underside of his house in order to avoid getting picked up by the mandatory evacuations. And so when they finally leave, he comes out and literally goes on a fortifying spree. He ransacks his entire neighborhood and basically fortifies his street into an own personal camp and like his own personal pretty much kingdom pretty much because he has fortified everything to the T. He has set up electrical fences, pillaged gas, run power through his house, and he is pretty much doing it all on his own. He sets up cameras and, he's pretty much settled in. He's pretty much fortified his entire neighborhood to fit his needs since he's the only one living there. So he diverts power to his house, uh, basically ransacks the gas supply. He's pretty much uh, a doomsday prepper who's pretty much living the doomsday dream right up until he meets Frank. Now, Frank is, if you didn't play the game, Frank is essentially an original character because Frank is only somewhat mentioned in the game, and there's like this backstory that's alluded to, but it's not really explored. But he's a named character in the game. We just don't see him. Well, we do see him, but when he's dead. Uh, and here they've decided to basically give him a backstory. Now, everyone was saying in the news and press media outlets how episode 3 is gonna be the beginning of where the show diverges from the game. And uh, they weren't lying. They weren't lying. They said they earmarked episode 3 as the one where we would start to see real diversions from the game, and they were right. Unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about this, but mostly negative. Uh, they were right. They weren't lying. Now, just from this shot alone, I could already tell that there was going to be gay stuff for the rest of this episode, and boy, was I right. Uh, they pretty much give Bill and Frank an entire backstory, this unrealistic, well, we'll get into that later, but they give them an entire backstory of how he basically takes him in as a stranger. It's how do I say this? It's so unrealistic, man. It's how do I now I mean, okay, so I'm gonna Bill and Frank's backstory. So they meet, they wind up doing gay shit, they're lovers, whatever. Pretty much live out their 20-year journey together in this doomsday apocalypse without any struggle of any kind. None whatsoever. This world has established that there are creepy crawly monsters out there who are determined to hunt you down and eat your brains. And I don't care how fortified Bill made this entire neighborhood. Murphy's Law states that if something can go wrong, sooner or later it will go wrong. How, in the span of 20 years, is the worst thing you have to deal with one night of raiders trying to break into your house? One night in the span of 20 years. How? Where are the zombies? Where are the clickers? The potential has been wasted because what we get, what we wind up getting is a near perfect love story with little to no trifles and little to no struggles in a post-apocalyptic world where, again, for the upteenth time, there are monsters out there trying to eat your brains. Me personally, I don't care if I'm stuck in the same house with Jessica Alba for the next 20 years of my life. Spending your life with one other person in a house, never leaving, never meeting other people, no outside interaction, nowhere else to go. 20 years in the same house. That would drive anyone up a wall. That would usually cause strife within two people. And on top of the fact, knowing that there are zombies out there, literal zombies who want to kill you, and the thought that they could come in and raid your house at any minute, it's just not there. It's not there. They have it so this guy fortified the entire neighborhood so now nothing can get in. The traps. Bill is notorious in the games for setting up traps. He almost accidentally kills Joel in the game using one of the traps. But in any case, it's just, it presents a really unrealistic view of what two people who meet each other and then fall in love and then try to make something out of that. It's so unrealistic because it takes away any sense of realism, and it takes away any sense of struggle or real life. Like, they don't seem like real characters. Real characters by like the 5 or 10 year mark would be going insane. They'd be getting tired of one another. They'd go insane. Imagine living in the same house for 20 plus years, nowhere else to go. If you go out, you might get eaten. If you go out, you might get killed by raiders. If you go out, you might get lost and never find your way home again. All these things to explore and mess around with. One person, like Bill, may be too scared to go outside. Another person, like Frank, may want to desperately want to go outside and see what's out there. See who else we could befriend or who else we could bring into our community, bring people in or have, do something other than living inside a house with the same person for over 20 years. All those things could have been explored, but no, what we wind up getting is again a very unrealistic depiction of what this type of relationship would be like. And at the end, in order to basically make us feel something, we wind up with literally what I think is the biggest cop out ever. We wind up with Frank having, after 20 years, some sort of degenerative disease, and that is honestly, it's literally the cheapest way to make us feel something. It's literally like there's no other way to say it. It's literally like they tried making some sort of gay utopia. It's without faults, without struggles, without anything of the sort. And it's even less realistic when you consider small details from the game, which we'll cover right now. Now, during the game, we find what is a letter from Frank written to Bill when Frank pretty much decided to go off on his own and get the car battery that Bill was bitching about, apparently. And he winds up getting bit and he dies. But before he dies, he leaves Bill this note, which reads, "Well, Bill, I doubt you'd ever find this note because you were too scared to ever make it to this part of town. But if for some reason you did, I want you to know I hated your guts. I grew tired of this shitty town and your set in your ways attitude. I wanted more from life than this, and you could never get that. And that stupid battery you kept moaning about, I got it, but I guess you were right. Trying to leave this town will kill me. Still, better than spending another day with you. Good luck, Frank." Now, that letter opens up so many doors to tell a more compelling story than the one we got. What if there was someone in the executive branch of the show, people, the showrunners, or anyone who runs the show? What if they had decided to, hey, let's, using the context clues given by this note, let's make an entire episode around that. Using just the context clues, right? It's using very limited context clues because you know little next to nothing about what actually transpired during the time that these two were together. But it's you can use inference. That's why it's called an adaptation. Not every single little thing is going to be how the game was, and that's okay. But still, you could have done a much better job than what you gave us. Now, imagine if in place of a 20-year streak of just pure happiness, gay utopia, and just whatever the fuck else they decided to cop out with. Can you imagine a 20-year period of these two just bickering and, one of them getting into trouble? Hell, maybe one time Frank, I'm making shit up now. What if one time Frank goes out, gets bitten, and then Bill has to chop his arm off? And now Frank's going around without a hand or something that is in tune with the characters that are established by the game using the small context clues. Something along those lines. That would have made for a much more compelling story than we got. Rather than have no struggles whatsoever. Can you imagine what we could have gotten with these two literally constantly bickering back and forth? Let's say Frank, right? Frank's the one that wanted to get out. Him doing a bunch of shit that upsets Bill, and then Bill always forgiving him because he doesn't want to lose him, or some other shit. And then, for God's sakes, again, for the millionth time, the zombies, the walkers, the clickers, have them start invading the house. Have the raiders, the looters, the bandits, as they're called in the game, have them start trying to break in and have them work together as a team to try and preserve what they have. It's it would have been so much better as opposed to what we got, which is essentially again a 20-year streak of pure happiness. And it's just not realistic in a post-apocalyptic world. Again, Murphy's law. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And it's very, very rare that people last so long in a post-apocalyptic doomsday scenario where there are monsters trying to kill you. Very, very rarely do people live so comfortably for 20 years straight. It's just ridiculous. In my opinion, it's fucking ridiculous. Now, again, if this was like, say, a piece that I was going in blind into, if it was like a, say, like, oh, the world ended, and then these two men found each other, they fell in love, and you know, whatever happened, I'd be like, "Oh my God, this is well acted. I mean, Nick Offerman, I think this gentleman's name is, who plays Bill. My God, this guy has range. Like, he played the part really well. Like, the emotions that he was supposed to be showing really, really well. And the other gentleman, who I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but the guy playing Frank, wonderful performance. These two actors are solid. They bounced off each other really well. And I'm not griping the performance per se, but then in the back of my mind, knowing that this is supposed to be The Last of Us, it's not The Last of Us, you know? It's not it's not this perfect utopian world that we see here. It's a world where leaving your house could result in your death. It's a world where breathing can result in your death. It's a world where making the slightest bad choice you could possibly make could wind up in you dying. That is the world that we as an audience know as The Last of Us. A world where even the most minute detail, the most minute screw up can result in disaster. But we don't get that here. We get something completely different, and something that, which quite frankly, it does a disservice to the characters, and it's a disservice to what the story could have alternatively have been. Just to top it all off, Frank here decides that he's gonna pretty much uh unalive himself using the pills that he takes for his medication. And he's basically telling, it's their last day. He's like, Bill, I want this to be my last day. Uh, do everything I want. Take me out to dinner, this, that, and the other. Super mushy stuff. And then he basically asks him to let him live this last day how he wants to live it. Before, when he poured drinks for each other, Frank only saw Bill poured two separate glasses, and then Bill adding the medication to one of the glasses, which was Frank's glass. But then, through a series of exchanged looks, Frank pretty much deduces that Bill basically drugged the entire bottle beforehand, which in simple terms means that Bill has decided to unalive himself as well. Frank does not agree with the choice, but Bill puts it in such a way that Frank is compelled to go along with it. He pretty much says, yeah, you're the only thing that's mattered to me in the last 20 years, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. Uh, you know, so they both decide to kick the bucket together, and that's how they die, apparently. Um, and again, I don't need to. Basically, those who have played the game, this is a huge deviation from the game, because Joel and Ellie meet Bill, and he's basically a good part of the first chunk of the game, and it's a huge deviation. And then we finally cut back to Joel and Ellie arriving to Bill's gated community per se, and they go inside basically to find that they pretty much uh they kicked the bucket together, and not to use a terminology that'll get this video flagged, but there he is. He's knocking on that bedroom door, and we are led to believe that inside of that bedroom door are the bodies of Bill and Frank, who are no longer alive. And so Bill pretty much leaves a note behind telling Joel to basically ransack his house and take whatever he needs. And in the note, he says, uh, that's why men like you and me are here. We protect the ones we care about the most. And he says, use my weapons and my gear to help you protect Tess. And that really strikes a chord with Joel, because obviously we saw in the last episode Tess died, so it's obviously gonna pull at a certain heartstring. So right here, this little scene looks straight out of the game. Joel setting the ground rules. Okay, we're gonna take you to find my brother Tommy, who used to be a Firefly and who might be able to help you go where you need to go. But here are the ground rules. You do what I say when I say it, this, that, and the other. Straight out of the game. Like what, 30-second, maybe a minute moment in exchange back and forth? Perfect. Straight from the game. Joel setting the ground rules, and Joel and Ellie basically gearing up to ride away. And again, straight from the game is Ellie's just amazement at certain things about normal human life. Because Joel earlier in the episode was telling her about planes and such. They run into. Oh, actually, let me go back, because that was a nice shot. So earlier in the episode, they run into a crashed plane, and Ellie's pretty much gushing over it. She's never been on a plane. She was born during this outbreak, pretty much the end of the world. And she doesn't know life as it once was. Hell, even life in the mid 90s would have been considered by Ellie to be like this futuristic life, as opposed to the literal hellhole that they're living in now. And she's like sitting in a car, and she thinks like the car is like a spaceship. Whereas to Joel, this shitty car, I don't remember what brand it is, but the car is so shitty it'll barely run, but it's good enough. And Ellie is just like, oh my god, this car is like a spaceship, because like it's certain aspects of regular human life that all of us take for granted pretty much, she finds amazing, because she was born in the apocalypse, the literal hell that is the world in The Last of Us 2023. uh, she was born, so she doesn't know much stuff about the world before her. Again, main thing, it could have been so much better. But instead, they opted to show a very safe and very, very unrealistic way of life that two people trying to be together would go through if this was like a real thing. If like the world had actually ended, you wouldn't be living happily ever after 20 years stored away in a house without nothing happening to you, in a world with monsters, with raiders, with looters, with people using the us against them, survival of the fittest mentality, and trying to make you pay for it up the ass. I will go insane. I don't care who you are. I will go insane living in my house for the next 20 years, isolated, with all this shit happening around me, the world crumbling around me. I would go insane. And any given person would go insane having to go through that. But apparently not these two, because uh, the writers apparently think that anyone from a certain demographic or a certain identity or a certain sexuality, these people cannot be portrayed in a negative light, or they cannot go through anything that is perceived as negative. They have to be perfect. They have to do this. They're not real people. They're not real people. They treat them like not real people, and I would hope that people belonging to this group, or this like people who identify with Bill and Frank, would find it really respect disrespectful. The real world would be much more dangerous, and what would really happen uh, is a stark contrast to what we wound up getting with this episode. But I mean, acting wise, it was solid. These two gentlemen are really nice actors. The only thing is, in the back of my head, I know that this is supposed to be a Last of Us TV show, and for the most part, it wasn't The Last of Us. It was a show called Bill and Frank's Gay Utopia. That's what I thought I was watching. Like, I knew it's supposed to be The Last of Us, but it felt more like Bill and Frank's Gay Utopia. But you know, yeah, it. We got what we got, and just moving on, moving forward to episode 4. Now, episode 4, oh boy. I am praying to God that they stay true to the games, that they don't deviate too much during this episode, because if from the trailer we kind of see where this episode takes place during the timeline of the game, and if it stays true to how the game plays out, we are in for some delicious Joel action, some zombie action. We are in store for a lot of Last of Us-y things that everyone is gonna love and enjoy. But here's hoping that they don't deviate too much and that they stay true to what was in the game. But yeah, that'll be all. Until next week, take care, y'all. Peace.